Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they said, tear it down, down to its foundations. O daughter Babylon, you devastator. Happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. Dance, niggas. Believe me, I thought long and hard about this title for this sermon. Even now, I can't believe I chose it, which perhaps accounts for where it really comes from. I do not like this title any more than any of you. I can hear some of you say, Reverend Scott, really? Some of you find it divisive, perhaps, and off-putting in a way that unnecessarily disturbs the diversity we have so carefully cultivated since the pandemic shuttered us at home to listen to sermons I taped from this, my upper room. Why now throw this dirty, ugly, and hurtful word into our sacred space, into the midst of our collective worship? Last week, I recalled for the good people in the Mennonite community of Harrisonburg a story about my mother's purchase of an upright piano. It went something like this. When I was 15, I begged my mother to buy our family a brand new Baldwin upright piano. I had not taken piano lessons since the second grade, and it surely could not be the wisest purchase that she could make when she and my father had 7 mouths to feed. But I knew my mother's heart, and I knew her sensibility to turn upside down the heavens and the earth if it meant any of her children might discover a brighter destiny than hands gnarled by mindless, spirit-numbing labor. So I pressed my case, and I told her that my youngest brother, Jimmy, who might have been 4 years of age at the time, deserved an early start to discover his talent for playing piano. That was my ruse. She looked at Jimmy playing with Legos on the floor, and then she looked at me, and in that moment, she decided the expense of a piano against the cost of Legos was irrelevant. Later that day, my father returned home from work, bristling with excitation. He untucked the album from under his arm, the one he had purchased at a nearby record store. He withdrew it carefully, almost sacramentally, from its sleeve, placed the slick, shiny vinyl disc on our well-worn hi-fi, and suddenly, Duke Ellington in concert at Newport filled the air. Enraptured with Johnny Hodges on Jeep's Blues, we all listened closely as if communing with a sainted host as the music lifted overhead in our small apartment. My mother smiled as she closed her eyes, soothed in her conviction that a piano in our house was more needful than bread. That story came to me on the Saturday evening, the day before I would deliver it in the high school auditorium at the Mennonite school. But as I considered the psalm before us for today's service, it suddenly came to me why my mother had resolved herself, come hell or high water, to acquire that piano, gleaming with mahogany splendor and a lustrous sound to match. I don't know why I had forgotten the earlier, more terrifying story she shared with me in my early adulthood. I no longer recollect the context, but she told me quite candidly how tricky and dangerous it was to live in Virginia during the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s, the decades during which she matured into a young woman. She informed me how mindlessly racism had rigorously structured the relations between whites and blacks, that blacks ignored what was required of them by way of deferential behavior to their own peril. In the earliest days, my mother and her siblings received their education by any means available, which is another way of saying by any means necessary. My grandfather, as many of you already know, worked as a very young man where most young and, as it turned out, old black men worked in the earlier part of the 20th century. He helped to lay rail for the trains that would crisscross our state, rail that would wind along rivers and secret a path near the base of mountains into neighboring states. When the war came in Europe, he served his country with a splendid grace and an uncommon courage. He returned without fanfare for the contribution of his race, but set his mind toward the sowing and harvesting of crop on land that was not his. He became a sharecropper and husbanded his wages well to begin purchasing land, an acre at a time. He persisted in his effort to become an independent farmer, nursing his dream year by year, rock by rock, stream by stream, and tree by tree, until at last his holdings had swelled to 500 acres. He worked as hard as John Henry, but Horace Miller did not die with a hammer in his hand. His bride birthed 11 children in time, and as each boy or girl came along, he added a room to the house he began to build, as the Depression swallowed up the rich man's gain in paper and coin. My mother told me once that as a child, the Depression passed without her notice because Papa had become so self-sufficient with his farm that his brood never wanted for a crust of bread or milk. He grew his own wheat and processed it himself for flour. He milked his own cows in the morning and in the late afternoon, and everything from potatoes to tomatoes and from beans to peas he cultivated from the red clay soil of Earlysville, Virginia. He was master of all that he surveyed and thanked God with prodigiously crafted prayers of thanksgiving before ever anyone dared to touch the food that Mama had so well prepared. But then dawned that day when visitors came unannounced. Some neighboring farmers who had warily watched Horace Miller as he went from strength to strength and from quiet authority to visible dominion over his lands and creatures. They took their seats around his table, their muddied boots soiling the carpet beneath. They asked to see the children, for he had so many, and then they asked to see their mirth, to hear their glad songs sung out loud, the kind of song they might have sung in the front yard. Let those children sing for us, Horace. Let them do a jig there on the table's top. And then one of them cried out the curse they had intended from the start. Dance, niggas! Papa, as proud a man as he was, might have killed all of them for the insult to his wife, to his children, to his home, an insult that cut him to the marrow of his own bone. but he knew where he lived. And he knew the way of things in Virginia during the 30s, how black men had lost their lives over trifles, over a glance or an unintentional stare. He knew what the greater tragedy would be if he unclenched the fist behind his back to smack them all into God's kingdom come. The danger was palpable, and it was thick as tar. Papa never grinned, but he bared it. He bared it with stolid, unflinching stoicism. The trespass came to an abrupt but sullied end, and the message had been clear that Horace Miller, however successful he had become under his own power, was just another nigger, living and breathing at the whim of those who enjoyed the power to use the ugly, accursed word with impunity. But Horace never moved. Like a tree planted by the waters, he stayed right there on the side of Advanced Mills Road, his house facing the silken blue haze that seemed always to hover over the Blue Ridge Mountains. He helped others like himself, black farmers of grit and backbone, to build a little church. On a Sunday morning, he took his seat dutifully as an officer of the house of worship in the Amen corner. He was among those men preachers could always count on to push them up the hill, as they would say, during their sermons. Papa sang out loud the songs of Zion. He could not play the harp, but he made certain to help secure the church, the one instrument the Baptist church cannot do without: a piano. A piano. The piano was there to glorify God if anyone could play it, and there is always someone who can play it. The psalmist sings that because Israel was captive, enslaved in a foreign land, they could not sing the songs of Zion. But in the next breath, the psalmist realizes the folly of refusing to sing. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. My grandfather knew the power of praise, and that the praise of God worked best in the heat of oppression and persecution. What else could one or would one do when the hound of hell barks and snarls to make us faint and to paralyze us with fear? We sing praises unto our God. That's what we do. In the thick of the whirlwind, during the blast of the hurricane, as it tumbles river boats and sends the roofs of houses sailing on the wind like tinfoil kites, that is the time we raise our praise. While Papa struggled to curb his fury, Mama sat quietly in the corner of the dining room, rocking to and fro and singing all the while. What a friend we have in Jesus. I don't know if those men ever returned to Papa's home. My mother never spoke of the matter again, and I never asked. But I know how insult feels, how it sucks all the air out of the sky so that you cannot breathe. I know how it feels to be held captive in one's own home, to suffer abuses both large and small, to feel the sting of a word that wants to slay the soul. I know how boiling rage can be incited, so that if my children are called by names I hate, I might yearn for the revenge the psalmist cites about the babies of the oppressors being dashed against a rock. But now let me assure you all, the last part of the song, that last line, has always stuck in my throat. I don't want this revenge. The revenge in the corpses of babies born to those who wish to kill me. I would rather sing a hymn, croon an anthem, or, like Duke Ellington, let a song go out of my heart. But I left one critical part of the story about my grandparents' home. I left it out. You need to know this part. They had an old piano there in the living room. I know not how. I never asked. Its white keys had turned yellow and the black keys had begun to flake and splinter. But in the evening, after supper, Papa repaired to his front porch to look on the darkening purple over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Mama would take her place in a steel lawn chair beside him to pluck the beans for the next day's supper. But Uncle Ralph, one of my mother's younger brothers, would hold forth in song after song from the old church hymnal standard. His voice would carry from the living room through the front screen door and even down the road as far as the beginning of the pasture for the cows and the mules. Uncle Ralph accompanied himself on the old piano with gusto as his left hand flopped against the keys. He had been afflicted with cerebral palsy in his youth, and one leg was shorter than the other, and it gave him a gait that was more like a dance than a walk. The palsy in his left hand caused it to wither some, though he managed just the same to work all day with Papa in the fields. But in the evening, we did not want to hear Horowitz or Tatum at his best. But Uncle Ralph, punching out the steady rhythm of "Come and go with me to my father's house." Play, Uncle Ralph, play. What antidote, what balm can one use to neutralize race hatred, to undo the harm of raggedy treatment, and to defang the troubles of this world? Sing me a song. One of the songs of Zion, a song of Earlysville, and a song of Pittsburgh. And yes, a song of Staunton too. God is everywhere. And if there be people with harps, let them get guitars if they don't have the harps. And if they have no guitars, then let them beat a drum. But if they have no drum, let them play some ham bone and give God the glory for all that God has done. Strong deliverer, our God. Strong deliverer. It ought to be enough to make the church sing, Amen.